Marcus Bell thought marriage meant partnership. He didn't know his wife had spent 3 years planning to take everything from him. Within 5 days, the woman who fired him laughing on a Monday morning would be begging him to save the company she thought was hers. Before we begin, if stories about quiet strength and earned justice move you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from today, because I read every single one and I want to know who's here for this journey. Stay with me until the end, because what happens on Friday is something you will not see coming. The morning it happened, the sky over the city was the flat gray of old coins. Marcus Bell stood in the lobby of Meridian Construction Group with a paper cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and he watched the elevator numbers climb toward the 14th floor, and he had no idea that in 11 minutes his wife was going to fire him in front of 9 people. He was 52 years old. He wore the same charcoal suit he'd worn for 6 years, pressed but faded at the cuffs, because Marcus had never cared about the way things looked. He cared about the way things held. He was, by profession, a structural engineer, though for the last 2 decades he had worn a title that fit him poorly, a title his wife had given him when they built the company together, back when they had nothing but a rented office above a laundromat and a shared dream that felt bigger than both of them. That title was Operations Director. It was, everyone at Meridian believed, a courtesy, a husband's job. The soft chair beside the throne where the real power sat, and the real power sat in the corner office on 14. And her name was Diane Bell, and she was Marcus's wife of 26 years, and she was about to make the greatest mistake of her life. Diane had built a version of the truth in her mind, and she had lived inside it so long she no longer knew it was a version. In her truth, Meridian was hers. She had grown it from a 2-person firm into a company that turned over $80 million a year, with 300 employees and contracts across 4 states. She had shaken the hands. She had won the bids. She had stood at the podiums and accepted the awards. And Marcus had stood in the back of the room in that faded charcoal suit, saying nothing, and she had come to believe that his silence was the same thing as his absence. She did not know what Marcus had been doing in the years she stopped looking at him. That was the first thing she didn't know. There would be others. The elevator doors opened on 14, and Marcus stepped into a conference room that had been arranged like a courtroom. That was his first sign. Diane sat at the head of the long glass table, and beside her sat Trent Holloway, the company's chief financial officer. A smooth-faced man of 40 with a watch that cost more than most of the crew made in 3 months. Trent had joined Meridian 4 years earlier. He was, everyone whispered, but no one said aloud, more than the company's accountant to Diane now. Marcus had known for 11 months. He had said nothing about that either. 7 others sat along the table. Department heads, the general counsel, a nervous woman named Priya, and at the far end, a young man Marcus didn't recognize, holding a folder. "Sit down, Marcus," Diane said, and she was smiling. That was the part he would remember, the smile. He sat. "I've called everyone here," Diane began, folding her hands on the glass, "because I believe in transparency. I believe that a company runs on honesty, and I've decided it's time to be honest about something that's held this company back for a long time." Marcus set his coffee down. He said nothing. He was very good at saying nothing. He had spent a lifetime learning that people reveal the most when you give them room. "Marcus," Diane said, and now the smile widened, and there was a lightness in her voice, an almost giddy quality, the tone of someone who has rehearsed a moment so many times that finally saying it feels like laughter. "You've been operations director for 20 years. And in that time, this company has grown into something extraordinary. But we both know the truth. We've built processes now. We've got systems. We've got people who do what you used to do, and they do it faster and cheaper and, frankly, better." Trent made a small sound. It might have been a laugh. "I've thought about how to say this," Diane went on, "and I've decided the kindest thing is the simplest thing. Marcus, as of this morning, your position has been eliminated. You're being let go. Effective immediately. The room went silent. Priya, the general counsel, looked down at the table. One of the department heads, an older man named Frank, who had known Marcus for 20 years, went very still, and then Diane laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, not exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was relief. It was the laugh of a woman who had carried a weight and finally set it down, who had waited years for this and found the moment easier than she'd feared. She laughed, and she looked at Trent, and Trent smiled back at her, and in that shared glance was everything Marcus had suspected and everything he had documented and everything he would use. "I'm sorry," Diane said, still half laughing, wiping the corner of one eye. "It's just, you always take everything so calmly. I thought this would be harder. Honestly, Marcus, this is a relief for both of us. You've been coasting for years. We all know it. It's time you did something else with your life. Fishing, whatever." Marcus stood. He picked up his cold coffee. He looked around the table, at the faces that would not meet his, and at the two faces that met his with satisfaction, and he did something no one expected. He nodded, once, slowly. "All right," he said. His voice was quiet and even, the voice of a man reading a weather report. "I understand." And then he walked out. The door closed behind him, and in the conference room, Diane exhaled and leaned back and said to no one and to everyone, "See? Nothing. 26 years and there's nothing there." And Trent laughed, and the department heads shuffled their papers, and the meeting moved on to the next item. And by lunchtime, most of them had convinced themselves it had gone well. They did not know that Marcus Bell had not built his life on the 14th floor. They did not know where he had really built it, or with what, or for how long. That was the second thing they didn't know. And it was the one that would end them. To understand what Marcus did next, you have to understand what Diane had forgotten. 26 years earlier, when Meridian was 2 desks and a coffee pot, the young couple had needed money to survive their first real contract. It was a municipal job, a water treatment retrofit, and it was too big for them, and they nearly lost everything financing it. It was Marcus, not Diane, who had gone to the banks. Marcus, who understood the language of collateral and covenants and personal guarantees. Marcus, who over the following 2 decades had structured every single financing arrangement Meridian ever entered. Diane won the contracts. Marcus made the contracts payable. She thought of the money as a river that simply flowed because she was good at her job. He knew it was a machine, and he had built every gear of the machine himself, and he had never once told her how it worked, because she had never once asked. This is the truth Diane had buried. Under her own success, Meridian Construction Group did not run on cash. It ran on credit. Like nearly every construction firm of its size, it operated on a revolving line of credit and a series of term loans that financed equipment payroll during the gap between billing and payment, and the enormous bonds required to bid on public work. That credit came from a single institution, First Cascade Commercial Bank, with whom Marcus had maintained a relationship for 22 years. And here is the mechanism that would decide everything, the load-bearing beam of this entire story. So, let me set it plainly. When a small company borrows large sums, the bank rarely lends to the company alone, because a company can dissolve overnight and leave the bank with nothing. Instead, the bank requires a personal guarantee, a signature from a real human being who pledges their own assets to stand behind the debt. And when Meridian's credit facilities had been established and renewed and expanded over 22 years, the personal guarantee on every single one of them carried one name, not Diane Bell, Marcus Bell. Diane had signed the corporate documents. She was the CEO, the face, the majority shareholder on paper. But she had never wanted to sign the personal guarantees, because personal guarantees frightened her, because they meant that if the company failed, the bank could come for the house, the cars, the retirement. Early on, she had said to Marcus, in a moment of vulnerability she had long since forgotten, "You handle that part. I can't sleep if I think about it." And he had said, "I'll handle it." And he had, for 22 years, handled it. Marcus Bell was the personal guarantor on $81 million of Meridian's debt. Every loan, every line, every bond facility, his name, his signature, his knack. Which meant that in the eyes of First Cascade Commercial Bank, Marcus Bell was not a courtesy title in a faded suit. Marcus Bell was the man the entire $81 million belonged to, in the way that matters most to a bank. And the bank had a relationship manager who had known Marcus for 2 decades and who took his calls personally. Diane didn't know any of this. She had not read a loan document in 15 years. She had signed where the little yellow flags told her to sign, and she had gone off to win the next award. That was the third thing she didn't know, and it was the largest. Marcus drove home slowly that Monday. He did not slam the car door. He did not shout into the empty house. He went into the study that Diane never entered, the room she called his hobby room, and he sat down at a desk that held 4 years of quiet work. And he opened a drawer and he began to lay out the pieces. He was not a cruel man. This is important. As he sat in that study, what he felt was not the hot thrill of revenge, but the cold clarity of a man who has finally been given permission. For 11 months, he had known about Trent. For 3 years, he had watched Diane change, had watched her begin to speak of the company as mine instead of ours, had watched her strip the word husband of its meaning at dinner parties, introducing him as my operations guy, with a little laugh. He had told himself it was a phase. He had told himself 26 years counted for something. But that morning she had laughed. And in her laughter, Marcus had heard the truth that no argument could have delivered, that she had already left the marriage in every way that mattered, and had simply been waiting for a convenient Monday to make it official, and that she believed, with total confidence, that she could do it and lose nothing. He opened his laptop. He began to read, not with anger, but with the careful attention of a structural engineer examining a building. He has been told is sound, looking for the load. He knows is there, the load everyone else has forgotten. He was still reading when the phone rang the first time. It was Frank, the old department head, who had gone still in the meeting. "Marcus," Frank said, and his voice was thick. "I don't know what to say. I've never seen anything like that. 20 years, and she does it like that, in front of everyone, with Holloway sitting there grinning." A pause. "You need anything, you call me. I mean that." "I'm all right, Frank," Marcus said. "Thank you. And Frank, do me a favor. Don't quit. Whatever happens this week, don't quit. There'll be people who need someone steady." Frank was quiet a moment. "You know something," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know a lot of things," Marcus said. "Take care of your crews, Frank," and he hung up. The days that followed moved with the patience of a rising tide. On Tuesday, Marcus did not go to the office. He was, after all, no longer employed there, but he made 3 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer named Elena Ruiz, a woman he had retained 11 months earlier on the day he'd first understood what Trent Holloway was. Not to his wife, but to his company's books. Elena Ruiz was not a divorce lawyer. She was a specialist in corporate governance and financial fraud, and Marcus had hired her the way you hire a structural inspector when you feel the floor beginning to give. "You were right to wait," Elena told him over the phone that Tuesday. "If you'd moved 11 months ago, it would have looked like a jealous husband. Now you have a paper trail, and, better still, you have cause. She fired you in front of witnesses, without a board resolution, without following the company's own bylaws for the removal of an officer. That's a governance violation. But that's the small thing. Tell me about the guarantees again." Slowly, so Marcus told her. And Elena Ruiz was quiet for a long time, and then she said, in the voice of someone who has just found a diamond in a gravel pit, "Marcus, Do they know, does she know, that you personally guarantee everything? No, Marcus said. I don't believe she's thought about the financing in years. And the bank, Elena said. First Cascade. Your relationship there. 22 years, Marcus said. The relationship manager is a man named David Okafor. He was a junior analyst when I signed the first note. I go to his daughter's graduations. He is the reason our rate is a full point below market. He does not know Diane. He has never met Diane. Marcus paused. He knows me. Then I need to understand something very carefully, Elena said, because this changes what's possible. When did Meridian last renew its credit facilities? 4 months ago. Marcus said, the full package. 81 million. Renewed for another term. My signature on every guarantee. He let the silence hold. Diane signed the corporate resolution authorizing the renewal. She signed it at a dinner. She didn't read it. She never reads them. And in that renewal, Elena, there is a clause I asked David to include. A clause that has been in every one of our facilities for 20 years because I put it there. It's standard, but people forget it's there. Tell me the clause, Elena said quietly. A material adverse change provision, Marcus said, and a key person provision. The facilities can be called. The loans can be demanded in full upon a material adverse change in the company's management or governance, or upon the departure of a designated key person from the operations of the company. He let out a slow breath. I am the designated key person. Elena, I have been the designated key person on every facility for 20 years. It's in black and white. It was renewed 4 months ago. Diane authorized it. And on Monday morning, she removed the designated key person from the company. Laughing, there was a long silence on the line. Marcus, Elena, Ruiz said finally, do you understand what you're holding? I do, Marcus said. She fired the one person whose departure gives the bank the contractual right to demand $81 million all at once from a company that has maybe $6 million in cash. Yes, Marcus said, and you're the guarantor. So even the demand, even the threat of it, puts you in the room as the only person who can make it stop. Yes, Marcus said again. And then he said the thing that told Elena Ruiz what kind of man she was working for. I don't want to destroy 300 people's jobs, Elena. I built those jobs. Half those crews I hired myself. I don't want to burn the building down. I want to walk back into it as the only person who can keep it standing. And I want everyone in that conference room to understand exactly what they threw away. There is a difference. I need you to help me stay on the right side of it. That, said Elena Ruiz, is the only reason I took your call 11 months ago. All right, here's how we do it, and we do it clean. On Wednesday, Diane Bell was riding high. She had done it. 26 years of feeling in some small buried way that she was carrying a passenger, and she had finally set the passenger down, and the sky had not fallen. The company was fine, better than fine. She had told Trent over dinner Tuesday night that she felt 10 years younger. Trent had raised his glass and said, to new beginnings, and she had believed every word. She spent Wednesday reorganizing. She moved a bright young project manager named Kayla into Marcus's old role, gave her a fraction of Marcus's authority and none of his knowledge, and announced it in a company-wide email that used the phrase, streamlining our leadership for the future. She did not notice that the email received no replies. She did not notice that Frank, in his office, read it twice and then closed his door and made a phone call. She did not notice because she had never in her life had to notice things like that. Marcus had noticed them for her. For 26 years, Marcus had been the man who noticed. That afternoon, an email arrived in the general company inbox from First Cascade Commercial Bank. It was routine in appearance, addressed to Meridian's finance department, requesting confirmation of certain officers and key personnel in advance of a scheduled quarterly review. Trent Holloway saw it. He glanced at it. He was not, despite his title, a man who had built anything, and the language of the covenants meant nothing to him beyond the numbers he liked to look at. He forwarded it to a junior accountant with a note that said, "Handle this," and he went to lunch. The junior accountant, a careful young woman named Sophia, opened the loan documents to answer the bank's questions. And Sophia, unlike Trent, actually read them. And somewhere around 3 in the afternoon, Sophia stopped and read a paragraph again, and then a third time, and then she got up and walked very fast to Priya, the general counsel. "Priya," Sophia said, "who is the designated key person on our credit facilities?" Priya looked up. "What?" "The key person provision. On the first cascade facilities, there's a named individual whose departure triggers a default." Sophia set the document on Priya's desk with a trembling hand and pointed. "It's him. It's Marcus Bell, and the material, adverse change clause, covers removal of officers without proper governance, and we fired him on Monday." "Priya, we fired the key person on $81 million of debt without a board resolution." Priya, the general counsel, went the color of paper. She had sat in that conference room on Monday. She had looked at the table and said nothing, while her CEO laughed and fired her own husband. She had known it was reckless. She had not known it was fatal. "Does the bank know he's gone?" Priya asked. Sophia held up the email. "They're asking us to confirm our key personnel in advance of a review." "Priya, they already know something's changed," someone told them. And in his study across the city, Marcus Bell, who had asked David Okafor to send that routine email at that routine time, looked at the clock and knew that the tide had reached the door. He did not gloat. He made himself a sandwich. Then he called Elena Ruiz and said, "It's in the building now. It'll reach her by tomorrow. Are we ready?" "We're ready," Elena said. "Thursday, you don't move. Let it build. Let them find out what they did before you ever say a word. On Friday, we go to the bank and we let the facts speak. You've waited 11 months, Marcus. You can wait one more day." "I've waited 26 years, Marcus said quietly. "One more day is nothing." By Thursday morning, panic had a texture inside Meridian, and it had reached the 14th floor. Priya went to Diane at 8:45 with the loan documents and a face gray as ash. She laid the papers on the glass table, the same table where Diane had laughed 3 days before, and she said, "Diane, we have a problem. It may be the largest problem this company has ever had, and I need you to listen to me without interrupting." Diane listened. And as Priya spoke, as the words, material adverse change, and key person provision and personal guarantee entered the room and refused to leave, the color drained slowly from Diane Bell's face, the way the tide draws back from a beach before something enormous arrives. "That can't be right," Diane said. "The company holds the loans." "The company. I'm the CEO. The company holds the loans," Priya said. "But Marcus personally guarantees them. All of them. 81 million. His name is on every guarantee going back 22 years. She swallowed. "And he's the key person. His departure from operations is a defined event of default. It's been in every facility for 2 decades, Diane. He wrote it. And we renewed the whole package. 4 months ago, you authorized the renewal." "I sign things all the time," Diane snapped. "That doesn't mean you signed the corporate resolution authorizing the renewal on those exact terms," Priya said. "It's your signature." And on Monday, in front of 9 witnesses, with no board resolution and no notice, you removed him. The bank has the contractual right to call every loan, today if they choose to. The room was very quiet. "Then we'll hire him back," Diane said, and there was the first crack in her voice, a hairline crack, the first she'd shown in years. "We'll reinstate the position. It was a restructuring. We'll say it was a misunderstanding." "You can try," Priya said, "but it's not up to you anymore. Once the bank knows the key person has left, the trigger is pulled whether or not you rehire him. They decide whether to waive it, and they only waive it for people they trust." She paused. "Diane, who at that bank do you know personally, by name?" Diane opened her mouth, and then she understood. with a horror that started in her stomach, that she did not know a single one. In 26 years, she had never once sat across from a banker. She had won the contracts. Marcus had made them payable. She had let him handle the part that frightened her, and she had forgotten she had ever been frightened at all. "He handled the banks?" she whispered. "Yes," Priya said. "He did." At that moment, Trent Holloway walked in, coffee in hand, watch gleaming, and said, "What's the crisis?" And when Priya told him, Trent Holloway, the chief financial officer, the smooth-faced man who had positioned himself so carefully at Diane's side, did the thing that told Diane everything she needed to know about what she had traded her marriage for. He set down his coffee. He looked at the door, and she saw in his eyes that his first thought was not how do we save this, but how do I get clear of this. "I told you the governance stuff was Priya's department," Trent said. "Yak. This is a legal problem, not a finance problem. I flagged that email yesterday. I forwarded it to be handled." "You forwarded it to a junior accountant," Priya said flatly. The two of them began to argue, and Diane Bell sat at the head of the glass table and stopped hearing them because a single thought had risen up and filled her entire mind, blotting out everything else. She had to call Marcus. She called him at 9:10. He let it ring 4 times. Then he answered, and his voice was exactly as it had been in the conference room, calm and even, a man reading the weather. "Hello, Diane." "Marcus." "Marcus." She tried to make her voice light, and it came out strained. "Marcus, I think we may have had a bit of a communication problem on Monday. I've been thinking, and I acted hastily. And I want to talk. Can you come in today?" We can work something out. Your position, we can restore it. Better than before. Let's just talk. I'm not an employee anymore." "Diane," Marcus said, "you told me my position was eliminated in front of 9 people. I remember it very clearly." "Marcus, please. I have a meeting Friday morning," he said. "First Cascade David Okafor." "You remember David?" "No. Suppose you don't. We're going to review the facilities. There are some questions about the company's governance and its key personnel that need to be addressed. After that meeting, I'll know where things stand. If you'd like to talk after that, you can call me." "Friday," Diane said, and the word came out cracked. "Marcus, do you understand what happens if they call the loans? 300 people. The company. Everything we built, Marcus repeated, and for the first time, just for a moment, something moved beneath the calm. That's an interesting word to hear from you, Diane. You spent the last 3 years telling everyone it was yours. I heard you at the Hendricks dinner, my company, my vision, my operations guy in the back. I didn't say anything then. I don't say much." A pause. "But you're right about one thing. 300 people. I hired half of them myself. Frank's been with me 20 years. I do think about them. I think about them a great deal more than you thought about me on Monday morning." Another pause. "I'll see you when I see you, Diane." And he hung up. Diane Bell sat holding a dead phone in a silent office. And for the first time in 26 years, she was afraid of her husband. Not of losing him. Of him. Of the quiet, patient, invisible man she had married and dismissed, and finally, on a gray Monday, laughed at. She understood, all at once, that she had never known him at all. That the silence she had mistaken for weakness had been strength holding still. That the man in the faded charcoal suit had been the load-bearing beam of everything she called hers, and she had cut him out with a smile, and now she could feel the whole structure beginning to groan. Thursday was the longest day of Diane Bell's life. She spent it making phone calls to people who could not help her. 2 other banks, cold called, who wanted 3 weeks of due diligence and would not touch a company in active default. A crisis consultant who quoted a number and a timeline that Meridian did not have. Her own lawyer, a transactional attorney, who admitted, uncomfortably, that Elena Ruiz was one of the best governance litigators in the state, and that if Marcus had retained her 11 months ago, then Marcus had not been surprised on Monday. Marcus had been waiting. That was the thought that kept Diane awake all Thursday night, in a house grown enormous and quiet, in a marriage that had ended the moment she'd laughed, and only now revealed how long ago it had truly died. He had been waiting. For 11 months, maybe longer, the man she'd stopped seeing had been sitting in his hobby room, building the thing that would save the company and end her control of it in the same motion. And she had walked right into it, laughing, because she'd been so sure there was nothing there. She did not sleep. And somewhere, in the small dark hours, she found, buried under the panic, a smaller and more terrible feeling, and it was shame. Because she remembered, whether she wanted to or not, the young man who'd gone to the banks so she wouldn't have to be afraid. Who'd said, "I'll handle it." Who had handled it every day for 22 years and never once asked her to notice. Friday came gray and cold like the Monday that had started it. At 9 o'clock, Marcus Bell walked into the offices of First Cascade Commercial Bank in a suit that was pressed but faded at the cuffs. David Okafor met him at the door, a big man with gray at his temples, and shook his hand with both of his own. Elena Ruiz followed, sharp and quiet, carrying a slim leather folder. They sat in a conference room, far more modest than the one on the 14th floor. David Okafor poured coffee himself from a pot in the corner, and he said, "Marcus, talk to me. What's going on over there? I get an inquiry about your key person status, and then I hear you're not with the company anymore. 22 years, and I never once worried about a Meridian note. Tell me, I don't need to start." And Marcus told him, plainly, without drama, the way he did everything. The firing, the laughter, the absence of any board resolution, any governance process, any notice. The fact that Diane had removed the designated key person from the company's operations in direct violation of the very covenant she had authorized 4 months earlier. He laid it out like a structural engineer walking a client through where the building would fail, and Elena Ruiz slid the documents across the table, one at a time, and David Okafor read each one, and his face grew graver with every page. "So it's a clean default," David said at last. "Multiple triggers, key person departure, and a material adverse change in governance. I'd be within my rights to call the entire facility this morning. 81 million, payable on demand." He set down his coffee. "And you, Marcus, are the personal guarantor on all of it. So if I call it, and the company can't pay, and it can't, it's got maybe 6 million liquid, then, legally, I come after you. Your assets, your guarantee." "Yes," Marcus said. David Okafor looked at him for a long moment. "You'd let me do that?" "I'd let you understand your rights fully," Marcus said, "and then I'd like to make you a proposal, because I don't want you to call the loans, David, and I don't think you want to either. 300 jobs, a 22-year relationship with 0 defaults until this week. Neither of us wants to be the reason that building comes down." He leaned forward slightly. "But that decision, whether the building stands, isn't Diane's to make anymore. And it isn't Trent Holloway's. It's mine. Because I'm the guarantor, and I'm the key person, and the only version of Meridian that this bank will keep lending to is a version I'm inside of, with real authority, in writing." He paused. "That's not vengeance, David. That's just the truth of the situation she created." Elena Ruiz spoke for the first time. "Our proposal is this. The bank issues a formal notice of default this morning it's owed, and it establishes the facts. Simultaneously, the bank offers a waiver, conditioned on remediation. The remediation is corporate governance reform. Marcus is reinstated, not as operations director, but as chief executive officer, with full authority and a board seat ratified by proper resolution. Diane may remain as a shareholder and, if she chooses, in a defined, limited role. Trent Holloway's financial oversight is subject to independent audit, because between us, there are irregularities in the books that Marcus flagged 11 months ago and that the bank will want to see for itself. David Okafor's eyebrows rose at that. Irregularities. That's what the audit is for, Elena said smoothly. We're not making accusations. We can't prove. We're asking for daylight. David Okafor sat back. He looked at Marcus, the man he'd known for 22 years, the man whose handshake had never once let him down, and he said, "You could have burned it all down. You could have let me call the notes and watch them lose everything." "Why didn't you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Outside, the gray sky was beginning, very faintly, to break. "Because I built it," he said simply. "And you don't tear down a thing you built because someone insulted you inside it. You fixed the part that failed." He looked at his hands. "The part that failed was that I let myself become invisible. I let her forget I was there because being invisible was easier than being fought. That's on me, David. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but a man can decide to stop being invisible without becoming cruel. I'd like to prove that this week." David Okafor nodded slowly. Then he pressed a button on the phone in the center of the table and said to his assistant, "Get me the head of the credit committee and prepare a formal notice of default on the Meridian facilities." And he glanced at Marcus, and something almost like a smile crossed his face. "Get me a car. I think Mr. Bell and I should deliver it in person." Set. At 11 o'clock that Friday morning, the doors of the 14th floor conference room opened, and Marcus Bell walked back into the company that had fired him laughing, and he was not carrying a cold cup of coffee this time. Beside him walked David Okafor of First Cascade Commercial Bank, and behind them walked Elena Ruiz with her slim leather folder, and behind her walked Frank, whom Marcus had called that morning, and Priya, whom Elena had called that morning, because the general counsel of a company facing default answers to the truth before she answers to anyone else. Diane was at the head of the table. Trent sat beside her, though he had spent Thursday quietly inquiring about his own contract's severance terms. When Diane saw Marcus, she stood up too fast, and her chair scraped back, and the sound was very loud in the silent room. "Marcus," she said. "Thank God. Sit down. Let's—" "David, is it, Mr. Bett?" "Okafor, thank you for coming. I'm sure we can work all of this out. I know there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Mrs. Bell," David Okafor said, and his voice was courteous and utterly immovable. "I'm here to deliver a formal notice of default on the credit facilities of Meridian Construction Group." He set an envelope on the glass table. $81 million, currently subject to call. The triggering events are the removal of the designated key person and a material adverse change in the company's governance, both effected by you without board authorization on Monday of this week. Diane's face did not so much fall as collapse. "You can't. The company. 300 people. The bank is prepared to waive the default," David went on, as if she had not spoken, "conditioned on immediate remediation. The terms of that remediation are not negotiable, and they are not mine. They belong to the only individual on this planet whose signature stands behind every dollar of this company's debt, and whose presence in its operations is the sole basis on which this institution will continue to lend." He turned. Marcus Bell finally sat down at the head of the table in the chair Diane had just vacated, and he looked at the woman he had married 26 years ago and the man she had chosen over him, and he did not laugh. He had earned the right to laugh, and he chose, deliberately, not to take it. That choice was the difference between him and them, and everyone in the room felt it. "Diane," he said, "here's where we are. On Monday, you told me I'd been coasting for years. You told me the systems ran without me, so I'd like to lay out, plainly, the systems you were describing." He opened Elena's folder. "This is the personal guarantee on the revolving line. My signature. This is the guarantee on the equipment term loans. My signature. This is the bond facility. That lets us bid on every public job we've won for 2 decades. The jobs you accepted the awards for. My signature. And this," he said, sliding one page to the center of the table, "is the key person provision, dated 4 months ago, on the resolution you signed at the Hendricks dinner without reading my name. Marcus Bell, the man you fired laughing." He let it rest there. "That's what was coasting, Diane. That's what did nothing. That's the passenger you finally set down." The silence in the room was total. Frank had tears standing in his eyes. Priya was looking at Diane with something between pity and vindication. Trent Holloway was looking at the door. "I'm not going to let this company fail," Marcus continued, and his voice was quiet and even. "Not because of you, and not because of me, but because of Frank and the crews, and 300 families who never laughed at anybody. The bank has agreed to waive the default on the following terms. I return as Chief Executive Officer with full authority ratified today by proper resolution. There will be an independent audit of the company's finances for the last 4 years." At that, Trent Holloway went very still. "You will retain your shares, Diane. You always earned those. You are a brilliant closer and a gifted salesperson, and I have never once denied it. But the day-to-day of this company, the part that frightened you so much you asked me to handle it 26 years ago, will be handled by the person who has always handled it." He closed the folder. "You can accept these terms, and the company survives, and you keep your equity and your dignity. Or you can refuse, and David calls the loans, and I, as guarantor, buy the company's assets out of the wreckage for pennies, which my lawyer assures me I am legally entitled to do. Those are the 2 roads. I'd very much prefer the first one." Diane Bell sat down slowly in the nearest chair. She looked at the documents. She looked at her husband. And in her face was the collapse of a story. She had told herself for so long she'd forgotten it was a story, the story in which she had built it all alone. "I didn't know," she whispered, and it was the truest thing she'd said in years. "Marcus, I didn't. I never looked. I never once looked." "No," Marcus said, and for the first time his voice softened, because he was not a cruel man, and this was his wife of 26 years, and there was grief in this for him too. "You never looked, and I let you not look, because I thought being needed quietly was the same as being loved. We were both wrong, Diane. This isn't revenge. It's just the day the lights came on." She signed the terms that afternoon. Trent Holloway resigned within the week, 1 step ahead of the audit, which ultimately found the irregularities Marcus had suspected 11 months earlier and referred them to counsel. Frank stayed and was promoted. Priya kept her job and never again stayed silent in a room where something was wrong. And Meridian Construction Group did not fail. Under Marcus Bell, it steadied and grew, and in time it thrived, and the man in the faded charcoal suit finally bought a new one, though he kept the old one hanging in his closet, because a man should remember the morning he was laughed at, so he never becomes the kind of person who laughs. The marriage did not survive. Some things, once cut, cannot be made to bear weight again. But it ended without shouting, in mediation, with Diane keeping her shares, and a real role in sales that she was, in truth, magnificent at, and with both of them learning. Too late to save the marriage, but not too late to matter, that respect is a thing you build every single day, and that the quietest person in the room is very often the one holding up the roof. So here is what I'll leave you with. The world is full of people who mistake silence for weakness, patience for absence, and steadiness for having nothing inside. Marcus Bell was underestimated by the one person who should have known him best, and he never once had to raise his voice to be understood. He simply waited until the truth could not be argued with, and then he let it speak. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew exactly what you were worth? Have you ever been the quiet one holding up the roof? Tell me your story in the comments, because I read them and there is a whole community here who understands. If this story moved you, give it a like so more people can find it, and subscribe to the channel, because I have more stories like this one coming, stories about quiet strength and the day the lights finally come on. Until then, take care of yourself, and remember, Never let anyone convince you that being kind is the same as being weak.